They were not reckless men chasing glory. They were trained pilots, flying machines built for a purpose, carrying the weight of their nation on their shoulders. In the cold skies over the South Atlantic, the Argentine A-4 Skyhawk pilots would prove that courage, discipline, and precision could challenge even the most advanced naval force of its time. These were men who understood that skill could sometimes outweigh technology, and that resolve mattered as much as firepower. The A-4 Skyhawk itself was not a symbol of intimidation. It was small, simple, and brutally efficient. Designed in the United States for the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, it embodied a distinctly American philosophy of air combat. Lightweight, reliable, easy to maintain, and deadly in the hands of a trained pilot. Decades earlier, American Skyhawk pilots had flown this same aircraft from carriers around the world, trusting its agility and resilience in the harshest conditions imaginable. By the time Argentina acquired the A-4, the aircraft was no longer cutting edge, but it remained honest. It did exactly what it was designed to do: low-level attack, precision strikes, survivability through speed and pilot skill. Argentine pilots knew its limitations better than anyone, yet they also knew its strengths, and they were prepared to exploit them fully. The Falklands War would become one of the last true naval air battles of the modern age. On one side stood the Royal Navy, equipped with advanced radar systems, guided missiles, and professional crews trained to NATO standards. On the other stood Argentine pilots flying long-range missions at the edge of human and mechanical endurance, often without radar warning receivers, without electronic countermeasures, and sometimes without confidence that their weapons would even detonate. The irony was impossible to ignore. The Skyhawk had been born in American shipyards, designed to strike hostile fleets, threatening U.S. interests across the globe. Now, flown by Argentine pilots, it would be used in the same doctrinal role, attacking surface combatants, against one of America's closest historical allies. The aircraft had not changed. Only the flag painted on its fuselage had. American history offered a parallel few remembered. During World War II, U.S. Navy and Marine aviators had learned the same harsh lessons, attacking enemy fleets at low altitude. They too flew straight into anti-aircraft fire, knowing that survival depended on speed, altitude discipline, and nerves of steel. From the Pacific to Korea, American pilots had faced modern warships and learned that naval air attack was never clean, never safe, and never forgiving. On May 25, 1982, Argentine pilots would relive those same realities, flying low over the sea to avoid radar, skimming waves so close that salt spray coated their canopies. They relied on the same tactics American Skyhawk pilots once used. Stay low, stay fast, commit fully. There would be no second chance. Captain Pablo Carballo led his formation knowing that this mission might be one way. His aircraft carried unguided bombs, dependent on precise release angles and perfect timing. There were no smart weapons, no satellite guidance, no second passes. Only muscle memory, training, and instinct. American pilots of earlier wars would have recognized this instantly. The cockpit pressures were universal. As the British ships appeared on the horizon, the Skyhawks transitioned from navigation to attack profiles with cold precision. This was not improvisation. This was doctrine. The same attack geometry once taught to American pilots was now executed flawlessly by Argentine airmen. In that moment, nationality faded, replaced by the shared language of combat aviation. The Royal Navy's technology was formidable. Sea Dart and Seawolf missile systems represented the future of naval defense. Radar screens glowed with contacts, computers calculated firing solutions, and crews moved with disciplined urgency. Yet technology, as history had shown repeatedly, could be overwhelmed by tactics that forced systems beyond their designed limits. The Skyhawks did exactly that. By flying below radar horizons and compressing reaction times to seconds, they turned theoretical superiority into practical chaos. American naval planners had warned of this vulnerability decades earlier. Now, it was unfolding in real time over the South Atlantic. What followed was not chaos, but a brutal test of professionalism on both sides. British sailors fought their ship with discipline and courage, just as Argentine pilots pressed their attack with focus and restraint. This was modern war stripped of propaganda, skill against skill, decision against decision. And in those seconds, the A-4 Skyhawk once again proved why it had earned respect across generations. Not because it was invincible, but because it allowed ordinary pilots to do extraordinary things when everything depended on them. The lineage of the A-4 Skyhawk was written long before the Falklands. In the early 1960s, American Navy and Marine Corps pilots flew the same aircraft into the dense air defenses of North Vietnam. Like their Argentine counterparts decades later, they attacked ships, bridges, and hardened targets at low altitude, facing radar-guided guns and missiles with little margin for error. The Skyhawk earned its reputation there, not as an untouchable aircraft, but as one that could survive punishment and still bring its pilot home. American Skyhawk pilots learned quickly that naval targets were unforgiving. Warships were layered with defenses, from long-range missiles to rapid-fire guns and small arms. Once committed to an attack run, there was no easy escape. Pilots spoke of the moment when the ship filled the windscreen, when every gun seemed aimed directly at them. Argentine pilots in 1982 would experience that same tunnel vision, that same narrowing of the world to speed, altitude, and timing. What connected these pilots across generations was doctrine. The United States designed the A-4 around the idea that pilot skill could compensate for size and complexity. Simplicity meant reliability. Low weight meant agility. The aircraft could take off from short decks, recover quickly, and return to combat with minimal maintenance. Argentina inherited not just the aircraft, but the philosophy behind it. By the time of the Falklands War, Argentine pilots were flying missions at the extreme edge of the Skyhawk's range. Unlike American carrier pilots, they did not have the luxury of nearby decks or aerial refueling in many cases. Fuel calculations were unforgiving. Every second spent maneuvering was a second borrowed from the return flight. This constraint added another layer of pressure that American pilots of earlier wars would immediately recognize. As the British task force operated near the islands, Argentine commanders understood that their only viable option was low-level attack. High-altitude bombing would be suicidal against modern missile systems. Precision was mandatory. Pilots trained relentlessly to fly below radar coverage, memorizing terrain contours, islands, and approach routes. This was not improvisation born of desperation. It was calculated adaptation. American history offered another parallel view acknowledged openly. During the Second World War, U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces pilots had learned to attack heavily defended ships using similar logic. In the Pacific, American aircraft had flown straight into flak to cripple Japanese fleets. Losses were heavy, but the doctrine worked. The Skyhawk was, in many ways, the refined descendant of those earlier lessons. On May 25th, when Argentine pilots approached HMS Coventry and HMS Broadsword, they executed those lessons with precision. Flying so low that radar struggled to separate sea clutter from aircraft, they forced British systems into their weakest engagement envelope. Sea Dart missiles, designed for higher altitude threats, lost effectiveness. Reaction times collapsed from minutes to seconds. Inside British operations rooms, professionalism met confusion. Operators tracked contacts that vanished behind islands, reappeared, then disappeared again. This was not failure of training. It was the reality of systems pushed beyond their design assumptions. American naval analysts had warned of such scenarios since the Cold War began. As the Skyhawks emerged from behind Pebble Island, both sides understood what was happening. The British knew they had seconds. The Argentine pilots knew they had one chance. There would be no second pass, no correction, no margin. This was the same brutal arithmetic American pilots once faced attacking enemy fleets in the Pacific and later in Southeast Asia. Captain Carballo's decision-making reflected a calm forged through preparation. When faced with overwhelming defensive fire, he adjusted targets instinctively. This adaptability was a hallmark of Skyhawk operations worldwide. American pilots had done the same under fire. Shifting aim points, aborting impossible runs, pressing when opportunity appeared. The British response was equally disciplined. Sailors manned guns, fired rifles, and followed orders under extreme pressure. Technology failed in moments, but training did not. This mutual professionalism underscored a truth often lost in simplified narratives. This battle was not incompetence versus bravery. It was competence versus competence under impossible conditions. When bombs struck HMS Coventry, the result was devastating. The delayed detonation, a known risk with low-level bombing, mirrored countless historical precedents. American pilots in Vietnam had seen bombs fail to detonate or explode seconds later, with catastrophic results. War has never offered guarantees. In the aftermath, Argentine pilots returned to base, shaken but alive. British sailors evacuated with discipline and courage. Losses were mourned on both sides. Yet, strategically, the battle revealed something profound. Modern warships, even with advanced defenses, were vulnerable to determined low-level air attack. A lesson American planners absorbed carefully. The A-4 Skyhawk emerged from the Falklands, not as an outdated relic, but as proof of enduring design philosophy. It had done what it was built to do decades earlier. Deliver pilots to the target, survive long enough to strike, depend on human skill as much as technology. For American audiences, the irony was unmistakable. An aircraft born from American ingenuity, once flown by U.S. Navy pilots defending carriers, had been used in a different flag's colors to challenge one of the world's most advanced fleets. The machine remained American in spirit, even as history placed it in new hands. And in that moment, the Skyhawk story came full circle. It reaffirmed a timeless truth of air combat. That courage, preparation, and clarity under pressure matter as much as sensors and missiles. A truth American pilots had learned, taught, and lived for generations. The loss of HMS Coventry sent shockwaves far beyond the South Atlantic. Naval analysts around the world took notice, especially in the United States. For decades, American strategists had debated the vulnerability of surface fleets in an era of fast jets and low-level attack profiles. The Falklands War transformed theory into undeniable reality. What Argentine pilots achieved with limited technology validated concerns long discussed inside American war colleges. Within the U.S. Navy, the battle was studied with intense focus. Officers recognized familiar patterns: the compression of engagement timelines, the limitations of missile systems against targets flying below radar horizons, the difficulty of coordinating layered defenses under real combat stress. These were not failures of British sailors, but structural challenges inherent in naval warfare. Challenges American forces knew they also faced. American Skyhawk pilots of the Vietnam era would have recognized the environment instantly. They too had faced modern warships, heavy flak, and radar-guided systems. During the Gulf of Tonkin incidents and later operations, U.S. pilots learned that even technologically superior fleets could be challenged by determined air attack when geography and tactics aligned. The Falklands reinforced a lesson American doctrine already emphasized: air superiority alone does not guarantee naval immunity. Control of the skies must be paired with early detection, coordination, and flexible response. The Argentine attacks exposed how even seconds of delay could decide the fate of a ship. This reality forced navies worldwide to rethink assumptions. For Argentine pilots, the campaign became a defining chapter of professional identity. Flying long distances at sea-skimming altitude demanded extraordinary concentration. One miscalculation meant fuel exhaustion or navigation failure. Unlike American carrier pilots, they had no floating runway waiting beneath them. Every mission ended with the same silent question: would there be enough fuel to get home? American history offered a sobering parallel during World War II. U.S. Army Air Forces pilots flying from distant island bases in the Pacific faced similar endurance challenges. Missions stretched aircraft limits. Weather and navigation errors claimed lives without enemy involvement. These shared experiences bridged nationality, reminding historians that combat aviation binds pilots through common hardship. As the Falklands conflict continued, British commanders adapted rapidly. Defensive formations changed, ship spacing increased. Air patrol coordination tightened. This adaptive cycle mirrored American operational culture, where lessons learned under fire fed immediate adjustments. The United States had long emphasized flexibility as a survival trait, and the Royal Navy demonstrated it under pressure. Meanwhile, the A-4 Skyhawk's reputation grew. Analysts acknowledged that its simplicity had become an advantage. Fewer systems meant fewer failure points. Manual flying skills mattered. Pilots remained engaged rather than managing complex automation. This echoed a core American belief in pilot-centric design that dated back to the earliest days of naval aviation. The United States would later integrate these lessons into fleet defense planning. Improved close-in weapon systems, better radar integration, and layered air patrol doctrine all reflected awareness sharpened by the Falklands. Though America was not a combatant, it absorbed the conflict's lessons deeply. The Skyhawk itself continued to serve in American inventories for years after, a testament to its enduring utility. Trainers, aggressor squadrons, and allied forces relied on it, not because it was new, but because it was honest. It revealed strengths and weaknesses clearly, allowing doctrine to evolve realistically rather than theoretically. For Argentine pilots, their Skyhawks became symbols of professionalism under constraint. They did not possess numerical superiority or technological dominance. What they had was preparation, courage, and the willingness to execute doctrine precisely. These traits mirrored the values American military history consistently celebrates. For Argentine pilots, their Skyhawks became symbols of professionalism under constraint. They did not possess numerical superiority or technological dominance. What they had was preparation, courage, and the willingness to execute doctrine precisely. These traits mirrored the values American military history consistently celebrates. The Falklands War also reminded observers that modern combat does not eliminate human decision-making. Captain Hart Dyke's split-second choices aboard Coventry echoed countless command decisions American officers had faced across history. There are no perfect options under fire, only responsibility. As smoke cleared and wreckage settled into the cold Atlantic, the battle's meaning extended far beyond victory or loss. It became a case study in how technology, geography, and human resolve intersect. American military institutions would return to it repeatedly, extracting lessons relevant well into the modern era. The Skyhawk story, American by origin and international by legacy, stood at the center of those lessons. It was proof that aircraft do not fight wars alone. People do. Machines amplify skill, but they cannot replace judgment. And so, the Falklands did not diminish the Skyhawk's heritage, it elevated it. The aircraft had crossed decades, doctrines and flags remaining relevant because its design trusted the pilot. That trust was a distinctly American contribution to aviation history. In the end, the battle reaffirmed something timeless. War evolves, Technology advances, but the outcome still hinges on men and women willing to commit fully, knowing the risks, and flying anyway. That truth connected Argentine pilots over the South Atlantic with American pilots across generations. As the Falklands conflict moved toward its conclusion, the air war at sea had already reshaped modern naval thinking. The attacks carried out by Argentine Skyhawk pilots forced a reckoning that extended far beyond Britain and Argentina. In Washington, naval planners studied the engagement with sober attention, recognizing echoes of challenges the U.S. Navy itself would face in any future high-intensity maritime conflict. For American commanders, the lesson was not about technological failure, but about human limits under compressed timelines. Missile systems worked as designed, but war rarely unfolds under ideal conditions. Geography, weather, and surprise can collapse reaction. Windows to seconds. The Falklands demonstrated that no fleet, however advanced, could rely solely on machines to guarantee survival. This realization aligned closely with American naval tradition. From the Pacific campaigns of World War II to the tense standoffs of the Cold War, U.S. doctrine had always emphasized redundancy, adaptability, and layered defense. The Skyhawk attacks reinforced the importance of combining technology with flexible leadership and well-drilled crews who could improvise when systems faltered. Argentine pilots, meanwhile, carried the weight of knowing their successes could not alter the war's strategic outcome. British ground forces continued their advance, supported by naval power that adapted and endured. Yet the pilots' actions were not diminished by that reality. History often remembers wars by their final results, but professionals measure significance by performance under pressure. American aviators understood this distinction deeply. In Korea and Vietnam, U.S. pilots had flown missions knowing that single engagements rarely decided wars. They flew because each sortie mattered within a larger effort. Argentine Skyhawk pilots operated under the same ethos, executing missions with precision regardless of broader odds. As the war ended, the Falklands became a living classroom for militaries worldwide. Naval architects reconsidered ship design. Air defense systems were re-evaluated. Training programs incorporated scenarios that mirrored the chaos seen near Pebble Island. The United States, with its global naval responsibilities, absorbed these lessons with particular urgency. The A-4 Skyhawk emerged as a central figure in these discussions, not because it represented the future, but because it demonstrated the enduring relevance of pilot skill. Its lack of automation forced aviators to remain fully engaged, reading the environment intuitively rather than relying on screens alone. This trait aligned closely with American aviation values that prize judgment as much as instrumentation. For American audiences, the Skyhawk's role in the Falklands carried a quiet sense of continuity. An aircraft designed to serve American sailors had gone on to teach lessons that would ultimately benefit American fleets. Its combat record across decades and continents validated the philosophy that simplicity and reliability could outlast technological trends. The human stories lingered longest. British sailors who survived Coventry remembered discipline under fire. Argentine pilots remembered the moment when sea and sky blurred into a single, unforgiving plane. American analysts saw reflections of their own history in both perspectives. Courage did not belong to one flag, and the years that followed, the Skyhawk gradually faded from frontline service, replaced by newer platforms, yet its influence endured in doctrine, training, and design philosophy. The aircraft had proven that relevance is not measured by age, but by the clarity of purpose embedded in its creation. The Falklands War closed a chapter in modern naval aviation. It marked one of the last conflicts where unguided bombs and visual navigation played decisive roles against major warships. For the United States, it reinforced the need to prepare for conflicts where technology might be stressed to its limits. Ultimately, the Skyhawk story is inseparable from the pilots who flew it. Americans, Argentines, and others who trusted the aircraft shared a bond forged through discipline and risk. They demonstrated that machines reflect the values of those who build and fly them. The legacy of the Falklands is not one of humiliation or triumph alone. It is a reminder that war tests assumptions relentlessly. Those who adapt survive. Those who prepare endure. Those who trust their people prevail. The final lesson of that war did not belong to one nation alone. It belonged to every country that understood what it truly meant to prepare for conflict in a changing world. The Falklands was not a clash of superpowers, yet it revealed truths that even global giants could not ignore. For the United States, it confirmed a belief forged across generations of warfare. Wars are not decided by theory, but by what survives first contact with reality. American military planners did not see the conflict as distant or irrelevant. They saw it as a mirror, a reminder that even with superior resources, success demands constant vigilance, humility, and respect for the enemy's will to fight. Technology could give advantage, but only if paired with training, leadership, and the courage to act decisively under pressure. This understanding shaped how America approached the final decades of the Cold War. Carrier strike groups refined layered defenses. Joint operations between air and sea forces became more integrated. Redundancy was no longer optional, it was essential. Every system was evaluated not for perfection, but for resilience when things went wrong. At the heart of these preparations stood the American service member, not as an abstract concept, but as the deciding factor. The wars of the 20th century had already proven this truth. From Normandy to the Pacific, from Korea to Vietnam, American victories were built not only on industrial power, but on ordinary men and women who adapted faster than their enemies expected. That is why the legacy of aircraft like the Skyhawk and battles like the Falklands mattered so deeply to American doctrine. They reinforced the principle that no machine replaces human judgment, no system substitutes for discipline, and no strategy succeeds without the willingness of individuals to carry it forward, even when the outcome is uncertain. History often celebrates the moment of victory, but it is the preparation beforehand that truly defines a nation's strength. The United States understood that every conflict leaves behind lessons written in sacrifice. Ignoring them is the most dangerous failure of all. The American approach to warfare has never been about spectacle. It has been about endurance, about learning faster than the enemy, about building systems that forgive mistakes and empower people to recover, adapt, and continue the mission. That philosophy did not emerge overnight. It was earned through decades of hard experience. In this sense, the Falklands War was not a footnote in history. It was a warning and a confirmation. A warning that complacency invites disaster, and a confirmation that professionalism, preparation, and resolve remain the most reliable defenses any nation can possess. When future American sailors and aviators trained, they carried these lessons forward. They studied not only their own victories, but the close calls, the near failures, and the moments where courage compensated for imperfect conditions. This honest reckoning became a quiet advantage. Wars may change in form, but their core remains constant. Fear, uncertainty, and time pressure will always test those sent into harm's way. What matters is how a nation prepares its people to face those moments. America's strength has always been its ability to trust its citizens with responsibility and to equip them to succeed. That is the deeper meaning behind this story. Not a tale of one aircraft or one battle, but a reflection of a national character shaped by challenge, a belief that freedom is defended not by symbols, but by action. The day America realized this war would change everything was not marked by a single explosion or a headline. It was marked by understanding. understanding that the future would demand constant adaptation. That strength must be renewed, not assumed, and that the cost of readiness is always lower than the cost of being unprepared. In the end, history remembers nations not for the weapons they built, but for how they used them, and why. The United States has always fought its wars with an eye toward what comes next, toward a world that, once secured, must be rebuilt and protected again. This is why these stories endure. They are not about fear. They are about responsibility, about the burden carried by those who stand watch while others sleep, and about the quiet determination of a nation that understands what is at stake when the world is pushed to the edge. That understanding, once earned, never fades. It becomes doctrine. It becomes culture. It becomes legacy. And that is why this war changed everything.